There's a version of NBA history where we get to see Derrick Rose become one of the greatest point guards this league has ever seen. He had the tools and he had the talent, along with the story. He was the embodiment of Chicago basketball, yearning for their first star since Jordan. We never got to see Derrick Rose peak for so long. Once he peaked, he quickly fell down due to injury. So, this is the story of Derrick Rose.
Madison as Derrick Rose nails the three, and the Bulls take it over.
Rose grew up in Inglewood on the south side of Chicago. It's a neighborhood that's known for its violence, poverty, and a community that has historically been undeserved in just about every measurable way. Rose was the youngest of 4 brothers, raised by their mother Brenda in an apartment on 73rd in Marshfield. His brothers Dwayne, Reggie, and Allen were his first introduction to the game. They pushed him, challenged him in a lot of ways, kept him pointed in the right direction when the environment around them made that hard to do. At Simon Career Academy, Rose became one of the most watched high school players in the country. He led the Wolverines to back-to-back Illinois State championships in 2006 and 2007. Then one season at Memphis under John Calipari, and it was time. The 2008 NBA draft. And the city of Chicago was about to get something they hadn't had in a long time. A reason to believe again. The Bulls had a 1.7% chance at the first pick in the 08 draft. They won. And it almost couldn't have worked out more perfectly because the best player available was already from Chicago, already a Bulls fan, already someone who had grown up watching that team, hoping one day to play for them. Rose put on the jersey and it felt right in a way that draft picks don't always feel. There was no adjustment period. No, let's see how this develops. From the first year, the city was in. Rose won Rookie of the Year in 2009, but the moment really announced him to the rest of the league came in the playoffs. His very first postseason. Game 1 against the Celtics, the defending champs. He was 20 years old. He put up 36, 11 in OT. The only other rookie in NBA history to post a 35-point, 10-assist game in the playoffs was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We've never seen a rookie push the defending champs to the brink of elimination. This is when the league realized a star was being born in Chicago again. Second year, Rose was already an all-star. The first Bull to make it since Jordan in '98. The city hadn't forgotten what it felt like to have a player like that, and now they had it once again. But in his third season, that's when everything came together.
Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league?
Rose averaged 25 points, 7.7 assists, and 4.1 rebounds. The Bulls went 62-20, the best record in the NBA. He scored 42 against San Antonio. He had his first career triple-double. He was doing things at 22 that most players spend their entire career trying to reach. On May 3rd, Rose made NBA history and was named the NBA's MVP. At 22 years and 6 months old, he became the youngest player to win the award in the history of the league, record that still hasn't been broken. Rose put Chicago back on the map, and throughout the season, Rose just dominated everybody in the league. Rose was already at the top, and only his third year, another star was born in Chicago. Literally. The Bulls reached the Eastern Conference Final that year, the furthest Chicago had gone since the Jordan era. They ran into the Heatles with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, and unfortunately lost in 5 games. But nobody looked at that season as a disappointment. Rose was 22, the team was being built, and everything felt like it was pointing somewhere good. Then, it wasn't. The 2012 season was shortened by a lockout, but the Bulls were still one of the best teams in the league. They tied with San Antonio for the best record, and Rose just signed a 5-year, $94.8 million extension, a number so tied to his value that the league informally called it the Derrick Rose rule. Game 1 of the playoffs. Sixers. The Bulls were winning. The game was essentially over. Rose drove to the basket and jumped, landed on his left leg. There was no foul. There was no collision. His knee buckled underneath him, and we all know what happened next.
Came down bad on his left foot. See him holding onto his knee and down.
His ACL was torn. He would miss the rest of the playoffs and the entire next season. What had looked like the beginning of a superstar in one play turned into a question that nobody wants to ask out loud. Would he ever be the same? Coming back from ACL tear is one thing physically, but mentally, it's a whole different challenge. Rose was cleared to return during the 2012-13 season, but he held himself out. He wanted to be sure, and he also wanted to be ready in a way that the medical staff alone couldn't define. People had their opinions about that. Some were critical, some understood him, but Rose understood his body more than anybody else, and he wasn't going to rush that. He returned in October 2013, his first home game back. He had a late floater to seal the win, and the United Center was loud as it had been in years. It felt like a reset, like the story was getting back on track. Then 10 games in, he tore meniscus in his right knee, done for the season again. Rose's rise to stardom now was in jeopardy. He would come back in the 2014-15 season and play 51 games, his most since his MVP year. With averages of 18 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds, it looked like the Rose that we just seen just 2 years ago was gone. There were moments that reminded you of what he was still capable of. In the playoffs against Cleveland, he had a buzzer-beating 3 in Game 3. But unfortunately, the knee issues continued. Another meniscus surgery, and by the time the 2015-16 season ended, Bulls would end up missing the playoffs for the first time in 8 years, and it felt like the chapter in Chicago was slowly closing. Then, in June 2016, Rose was traded to the Knicks. He was 27. He had been at the top of the league at 22 years. 5 years and multiple surgeries later, the question had shifted from how great can he become to how much does he have left. In New York, he still had his moments. Rose averaged 18 points in his first season there and had some generally good stretches. But in April 2017, he once again tore the meniscus and is left knee now, his 4th knee surgery in 9 years. He would then sign with Cleveland in 2017 to play alongside LeBron. Unfortunately, in Cleveland, he dealt with ankle problems and then got traded to Utah and got waived. After getting waived, he would then sign with Minnesota for the rest of the season. By this point, Rose was a backup on the minimum contract. There's a version of that story that ends there, quietly, without much fanfare. A former MVP who couldn't stay healthy, finish out his career in whatever role a team would give him. But Rose still had more than the take. On Halloween of 2018, the Timberwolves would face the same team that just cut him a few months ago, the Jazz. Rose would come off the bench as he usually does, but today was special. He would put up 50 points on 19 for 31 shooting, and he had 15 in the 4th quarter. He had 4 threes, and with the game on the line in the final seconds, he made a block to seal the win. After the buzzer, he stood there and just cried. His teammates came around him, and from somewhere in the crowd, you could hear it start again. MVP chants. What made that night resonate so widely wasn't just a number, it was the context. A guy who had every reason to stop caring, who had been through more setbacks than most players deal with in an entire career, who was making the minimum and coming off the bench, and going out and doing that. When someone asked him afterward what it meant to him, he said, "Everything. I worked my ass off." That sentence had a lot of years behind it. Rose would then sign with Detroit in 2019 and had one of his best seasons since his MVP year. 18 points a game, 49% from the field, with 14 straight games of 20 or more points. There was something peaceful about watching him in that stretch. He had figured out how to play a different version of the game, one that didn't ask as much of his body, and he was getting good at it. In February 2021, he would return to the Garden under Tom Thibodeau, his old coach in Chicago, and Rose would flourish in the new 6-man role. He averaged nearly 15 points off the bench and finished 3rd in 6th Man of the Year voting, and was a real part of a Knicks team that made the playoffs and won a first-round series for the first time in years. He would stick around in New York through 2023, dealing with more ankle issues along the way. Then, he was signed with Memphis for one final season, mostly in a mental role for the upcoming star of Ja Morant. He played 24 games, and the Grizzlies waived him in September 2024. A few days later, Rose announced his retirement. He took out full-page ads in the newspaper of every city that he played in: Chicago, New York, Cleveland, Minneapolis, Detroit, and Memphis. A quiet but thoughtful goodbye, very much in keeping with who he always seemed to be. Rose played 16 years in the NBA, and he averaged 17.4 points and 5.2 assists for his career. He was a 3-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, and the youngest MVP in league history, a record that may never be broken again. The Bulls retired his number 1 jersey in January 2026, the first number retired by the franchise since Jordan. What's harder to quantify is the what if, because the player Rose was at 22, that explosiveness, that ability to get anywhere on the floor, that fearlessness at the rim, there was a ceiling there that nobody had reached yet. Klay Thompson said it as well as anyone. You don't see point guards do what he did. The closest one is John Morant, and he doesn't feel as powerful as Derrick. The injury didn't just cost Rose seasons, they also cost him the chance to find out how good he could have been. And that's the weight of his career carries, not failure, but interruption. But here's the other part of it. Rose played 16 years. He came back from surgeries that would have ended other players' careers. He found ways to contribute long after anyone would have blamed him for walking away. He scored 50 points off the bench at 30 years old. He helped young players in Memphis understand what it meant to compete at that level, even when his own playing time was gone. The kid from Inglewood turned into a Chicago legend. That's what the Bulls put it when he retired, and it's hard to argue with it. Rose never got the championship. He never fully got back to where he was, but he kept showing up, kept working, and kept finding meaning in the game long after the game had taken so much away from him. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole story. Thank you all for watching, and if you got thoughts on where Rose would have landed in the all-time point guard conversation, feel free to leave it in the comments.